What happens when you combine the most innovative, eccentric and charismatic leaders, disruptors and founders from tech, with the pedigree and history of one of the most established institutions within the City of London? The Searching for Mana podcast will be produced in partnership with the London Stock Exchange. I'm Lloyd Wahed, the host of Searching for Mana. We're going to be interviewing some of the leaders, influencers and disruptors in the tech space, where I'm going to be trying to dig in and find out what's their mana, their superpower, their magic. Frederik, welcome on to Searching for Mana.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you on the show. So Frederik is part of the Cardano Foundation, and it'd be really useful if you could just open up, Frederik, in brief explaining the mission and the thesis for the Cardano Foundation specifically, and of course what your role within that is.
The Cardano Foundation is a Swiss non-for-profit foundation who is the guardian of the technology stack for the Cardano ecosystem. Now, when I think about the guardian of the technology stack, I think about it much wider than just the binary code. So we are one of three pioneering entities behind Cardano, but there's actually more than, to my best knowledge at least, 20, 30 companies who work full-time on Cardano and has, let's say, more than 30, 40 employees. On top of that, there's probably about 7, 8 million people who has a citizenship on Cardano. It means that they have voting rights and they build up economic identity to allow themselves to take action and get economic opportunities on Cardano, but also be a part of steering Cardano in this very vibrant world we're living in right now with a lot of changes.
Yep.
The speciality about us being non-for-profit is that we really care about three things. We care about adoption, so showing the world what a blockchain for good can do. So different use cases, but really showing about, what good can a blockchain do in the future of the world, both in an economic sense, but also in a social sense. The other part we do is we think about education, which includes regulation. So it's all about upgrading people's knowledge about third-generation blockchains, including regulators and policymakers. So I work a lot with regulators and policymakers about what is a blockchain, why is it relevant, and what is it actually going to do to help us in terms of getting more job creation, GDP, what about enforcement actions and all those things. And the last but not least is operation resilience. So if you're actually going to trust a blockchain for something as crazy as economic identity or your portfolio of assets for a fund, or you're going to build a new reserve currency, and you actually need to have something who looks at disaster recovery, something who looks at uptime, something who looks at stability of the code, something who looks at you can change the code to be more form and fit, but the thing doesn't go down. And Cardano is one of those few things in the world who has never been down, knock on wood. And this is very rare. Cardano is born in 2017. They're having such a big technology stack with thousands of companies who deployed assets and time and so forth on it, and it's never been down. So, but we look at it from a non-for-profit perspective, meaning that we're trying to take decisions to optimize towards the outcome in the next 10 to 20 years. Where normal for-profit companies would be looking at saying, okay, we need at least a profit within the year, or the next earning statements have to be positive and so on. So this sort of luxury situation, you can think about it that we are the guardians of the long-term time axis of talking about how does Cardano exist in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is really the harness of the nature of our job.
Thanks, Frederik. Well, you find yourself in a remarkably interesting position, as to the team in the organization and around it, of course. And I do want to, just a headline, spend a bunch of time on the show thinking through your leadership philosophies and how you're really managing that non-for-profit with the right type of incentives to get outcomes over a long time horizon, because it's a fascinating position that you're in. But it'd be remiss for me, of course, not to just ask a few specific questions as you laid them out right now. So I'd like to just kind of go through a few of those. So one would be to start with, since foundation, there hasn't been any technical outages, as you suggest. And then, of course, without naming them, let's say there's a few theoretical competitors where they're constantly being reprimanded for outages. So I'd like to understand why it's not happening. And some of the things that one could think through might be, well, is there more use on others that's making them have these outages? And or if not, what is it technically that the Cardano chain has in its makeup that allows for that? And where really are you on that horizon? So if all your plans come together over the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, and we've got AI coming through now where people are concerned, will that be able to hack Bitcoin and things like this? Are you the most advanced chain technically? And therefore that would be one of the things that you would be advising to that other category, which is regulators and institutions, as to why to adopt and use.
So I think it's a fair statement to say, oh, what about your pressure on the blockchain? So if we had a billion more transactions, will Cardano go down?
Yeah.
And to answer that question, you need to go down into the architecture of the blockchain and the way we think in Cardano. So Cardano is an academic research-driven platform. That means that we are not the fastest with coming out with new features, but we basically work in a research-driven manner. That means that we work with leading universities around the world. And before we implement something, we basically has a research philosophy. So we have a hypothesis, which is basically being accepted at a university. The work is then being done, and then it's being accepted, hopefully, not all, but nearly all is being accepted at last academic conferences, right? Where all the academics, all the smart people in cryptography are trying to basically break it. They say, oh, you can't do this, and this is wrong because of this, and so on. And what you basically see is that Cardano is built upon this scrutiny from the best and the brightest. And then we give it away for free. So what you see is a lot of blockchains out there who's doing really well is actually built on Cardano. What I mean about that is not that they've taken all of Cardano, but they're taking a lot of the research of Cardano. And in a certain way, that makes me very proud because it does two things. One is in terms of interoperability, you get more and more interoperable over time as people start to go towards your technical architecture in terms of their design perils. And the other part is more of, I don't know if you remember, there was this big push towards something called design thinking,
Yep.
Make it, break it, do it again, right? And that doesn't work very well on a blockchain. But a lot of blockchain has been really taking that ethos to heart and basically been promoting that. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be audited. It doesn't need to be security conform. We just need to get it out there and test it with the consumers. And I think what it does is it has brought a lot of attention around blockchains and a lot of great use cases, and maybe not so great use cases, right? But it brought a lot of distribution. And we've taken a different approach where we said, no, actually, if it goes on a blockchain, due to the nature of a true blockchain should be distributed and decentralized. And that's a part of the protective mechanism. It also means that you can't just delete what you made. It becomes an anchor into the history of the blockchain. It becomes a part of the provenance. And that means that from a feature perspective, we might have gone a little bit slower than others, but we are now up in a place where we are, if not the most technical blockchain in the world, so the best blockchain in terms of technical features, we are complete, right? Is there some bells and whistles we don't have? Yes, there is. But there's been a lot of talk, like, could you run Visa or MasterCard in terms of transactions per second on Cardano? And the answer to that is yes, you can. It's not a problem, right? Can you do CK rollups and enterprise adoption? Could you run an exchange on Cardano? Yes, you could, right? We know it both from the regulators part, but we also spoke to exchanges. And my world, I'm coming out of 20 years of building banks and exchanges. So I'm an infrastructure banker at heart, right? And we actually already did a small test. So we actually built a full core banking platform. So that's basically what drives a normal bank with 52 smart contracts, 3 ledgers, and some people. So yeah, you could actually replace a full infrastructure of a bank and run it on a blockchain. But would it be the best user experience? Well, probably not, right? Because in the end, I always feel that somebody would need to talk to somebody, right? We are but humans, right? I know in algorithmic trading, we have a lot of bot activity and so on. But in the end, the market is still not rational. It's not mathematics, right?
So Frederik, if you span that out, and thank you. So let's latch onto the design engineering element of this. I think a lot of the audience would have perhaps read The Lean Startup which is, a book where that, I think, was kind of, brought into prominence, which is, as you mentioned, let's break things, let's make progress, which in Silicon Valley, Y Combinator startup world seems to be a catalyst for outlier success, albeit, of course, there's a lot of failure with that methodology. With the block, it doesn't work because, of course, as you say, it remains forever, let's just say generally. However, for the adoption and user cases, it absolutely does, the design engineering approach. So in the position that you are at the foundation with a mandate for Cardano to be around in 20, 50 and so on years being valuable, if forks were to happen from Cardano, as you say, you didn't use the language fork, but you did say, other protocols are able to spawn out of Cardano, then where does that leave you if what we established in several years, 14 years as innovators and entrepreneurs and using, break it, okay, this isn't quick enough, this isn't bespoke enough for high frequency trading anymore. Where does that leave Cardano? And therefore, are you in some type of tricky conflict to try and think how that rolls out?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion, right? So when I speak about that the blockchain needs to be academically researched, it needs to be stand the scrutiny of time, it needs to have a good governance, right? It's because when I talk about blockchain, I talk about the infrastructure. So think about a city. A city has some hard infrastructure like internet lines, sewage systems, water lines, electricity, roads, right? Everything that goes below ground in a city, basically, right, is hard infrastructure. And that's not something you just, I'm going to do a test, I'm going to do 15 miles of sewage system and then run, I don't know how much sewage through it. And if it breaks, it's fine, right? Because then you just polluted the whole area, right? And we're laughing here, right? But this happens every single day, right? There's some people, taking down the Amazonas and doing horrible things there, right? But in essence, we all kind of agree that if we're talking about real used infrastructure, core infrastructure, this kind of design thinking has to be done in a different way. Now, in order for the city to be valuable, I don't know if you've been in some of those cities who's been, abandoned, right? So in the former East Bloc, right, we have a most famous one who had a nuclear disaster, right? And the earth is starting to take over the city. But when you walk through the streets there, it's a very eerie feeling because you have this like, there should be people or things here, but there's not, right?
Yeah.
And a blockchain, and this is again a very strange concept, right? A real blockchain does not work without humans and applications running on it. Now, we can have a discussion a little bit about artificial intelligence and could an artificial intelligence replace a human and get value out of the blockchain? And my answer to that is yes, I think absolutely it could. Okay. But it does need somebody who will do something with the blockchain in order for the blockchain to have value. So you can have the best technology stack, the best infrastructure, like the best city in the world, but there's no inhabitants, it has zero or very limited value. And that's why I think that the design thinking and lean methodology works really, really well if you're trying to design a business model or target operating model who captures value on the blockchain by servicing an industry or people, so basically by selling a product on it, right? But where it does not work at all, right, is it does not work very well if you're looking into, you're trying to establish a new nation state and you need this core infrastructure, right? And then suddenly it's just not there, right? Or it breaks, and then you figure out you have to take down, a skyscraper in order to fix the foundation of the skyscraper. Those things are just too costly to do.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And so, Frederik, I love your sewage example there. That really drives the point home. So, on the reverse of this, then we're not thinking 30 years out if we're a commercial institution. A lot of the peers that you're talking to the whole time, and then one of the points you mentioned was, onboarding and engaging, and so from some experience here, you have to have something, you have to have steps in the roadmap. So there's this wonderful 10, 20, 30 year horizon, which we all have for this technology and its applications. and there's what's been happening, where's the value, and different things come through in a different order. So, if you're infrastructure banking hat on, can see a lot of institutional engagement. How much genuine user case is there, and or how much is that the institution is trying to play some type of defense to not miss out on this technology, are all things I'd love to hear your sense and conviction on, specifically for Cardano. So, how are those conversations versus 2 years ago? What are you excited about that's happening right now that we could talk to the audience about? And is that right? It looks to me like payments, stable coins, have become one of the true kind of proof of concepts and market fits here for this technology. But I know you've got a much broader horizon. Love to hear your thoughts around that, please.
Yeah, so let me lean out of the window a bit and be a bit controversial on some of those points, right? So as an infrastructure banker, for me, stable coins has a usage, but it's not very interesting, because a lot of the stable tokens or stable coins, which we're seeing getting a lot of traction, is actually not doing remittances, is actually not sort of like solving a real world problem in sense of, creating job creation in Africa or economic identity or ensuring people who don't have access to global markets gets access to global markets. That's not really what they do. So if you take the numbers and look at the average trading size of USDT or USDC, right?
Yep.
You see it's a remarkable high, right? So in the hundreds of thousands, right? And you have to ask yourself, what does it do, right? And what it really does is it's used between centralized exchanges and some decentralized exchanges to settle and move value around, right? So it basically is being used to basically net out positions for centralized exchanges. Now, is this important and is this a real problem? Yes, it is important and real problem, right? But this is actually what the dollar used to be doing, right? So if you go into the normal world of banking, right, we are settling, or the majority of people are settling to a dollar rail, right?
Yes.
And now we see this fight for dollarization or anti-dollarization, and this is actually sort of, porting over into the blockchain world. Even though you see that they have a lot of success, these sort of so-called stable coins, right? I think what's more interesting is if we can design money in a different way. So let's, instead of looking at, how do we settle a position between two exchanges and we say, oh, that's the future of blockchain, I'd rather say, what's the future of governance? What is, if you have a country and you have a pandemic coming, I'm not saying that the COVID was a pandemic or not a pandemic, but we had a situation where a lot of experts said that there was a pandemic and we needed to do something. We even had forced closures, and we wanted to sort of rethink about fiscal policy or monetary policy. We don't have a lot of options because the way we think about money is very defined into a couple of core features. But what would happen if you had the ability of a blockchain which nobody can cheat and you can add more features into money? Would that allow you, for instance, if you be a medium-sized company who do not have an audit requirement, to prove to your nation state that you actually need help in a global crisis? So with the flick of a button, your ERP system can give you the data the government need to calculate how much aid you need for the next amount of time to survive on the other side, to ensure that you don't have to close down the company due to a macroeconomic event or a pandemic, right? So when you start thinking about how do we actually give the politicians positive power to redefine monetary and fiscal policy, or how do we ensure that the people who, by some reason, whatever that might be, don't have a national identity or do not have paper to prove that they can vote and those kind of things, and for whatever reason this is not being solved, right? You suddenly can give them the tool which they need in order to verify who they are and what is their payback or credit rating or whatever we call it, right? That allows you to get 2 billion people more into the global economy. And what we see, regardless if we're on the Austrian economist side or we're on the vocation side, right, we see in general, when markets grow, when the population grow, that's net positive in most scenarios, right? Now, it might not be net positive in a social setting, and GDP we have to be very careful about, right? But this ability to bring 2 billion more people into the global economy is net positive for everybody.
If I think about the progress of technology and when that's happened previously, one might suggest, of course, there's nuances, that early social media, or when Facebook came around, I certainly remember that there were, kind of catastrophe events where people were able to, in real time, provide information that helped people who are in those circumstances. And you thought, for all the bad and potential, okay, this is cool. This is great. We're able to communicate in a way. And certainly, early Twitter might be where you would start to check on what was happening in a particular area when there was a prominent event in preference to the traditional media. And then now you have these rails, which are payment rails. And if we think about, events happening like you just referred to, you could in insurance say that there's parametric insurance, which might be able to, in real time, solve for money getting into the hands of, say, somebody who needs it. So these are all wonderful, just to go to a question here. These are all wonderful things that, with our 20, 30-year views, we all want for our friends and family to exist in this world. And technology can be a capability that affords that. But, today you have to think, how do you onboard the critical mass? How do you get to that 2 billion consumers who could then benefit from this? And so I'd like you to, if you can, point to the way that you're doing that. So far, social media hasn't happened within the blockchain arena. Remittance, certainly. I mean, if you think of areas like Brazil, is prolific. There's this amazing progress there due to the payment rails that we have. But I'd like to know, again, you guys specifically, how do you get to that vision? What are you doing? What are you seeing coming through from a consumer acquisition perspective?
Yeah. Let me try and give you a couple of examples, because I think this is easier to grasp for everybody, right?
Yep.
So back in 2021, Cardano is a proof of stake blockchain, which gives you an economic opportunity to support the security of the blockchain by running a node. So basically participating in security, running this node allows you to earn some rewards. And what we did as the Cardano Foundation is we saw that there was a specific stake pool operator working together with a university in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Yep. And we basically delegated to him. Basically, we said, hey, you're doing something special down there about education and about, you have a vision for what you do, not just the security, but also a vision. And by delegating down to him, he basically were able to be associated with the global economy in a way he normally was not in Buenos Aires in 2021, right? And these means he then used to build a strategic collaboration with the Engineering University of Buenos Aires, who basically then started running this node, right? So I was just in December, I was there, and was in their data center, and I saw the node, and they were so happy, right? Because the university suddenly could get an income stream where normally it was very, it has a very bespoke income streams from the state and from certain sponsors. Yeah. But now it has an income stream based on providing securities of the Cardano blockchain. And what they did with that was they basically built a Cardano lab. And they also teach other blockchains, but they call it the Cardano lab because that's how it really started, right? And they're now educated, I believe it's the first 40 smart contracting engineers in Spanish, right? In Argentina on the Cardano programming language. So I met with 2 world banks down in South America, and those world banks were saying, we have an issue. We have too much money and we can't spend it. And I was like, why is that an issue, right? And they started speaking about accountability. So when they build a school in the Amazonas or something like that, what they see quite frequently is if they come by the school maybe 5 or 10 years later, there's nobody in the school, it's just a dead building, right? And then they can't just keep doing that, right? Or if they build a bridge, right, and nobody's using the bridge, it's just it's not why they're there as development banks. So they were talking about, could we use the blockchain to verify the usage of our investments in terms of the accountability, so we can start having a track record of data layer. How is the usage and what is the output of our investments? And the main issue they have is that in many places where they invest, it's not very digital, right? So those kind of data has to be collected by people on the ground. And when we showed them that we actually planted 1 million trees in Kenya, and every single tree exists on the blockchain and is connected to Internet of Things. So basically there's people on the ground taking pictures, there's satellites taking pictures, and there's earth sensors and wind sensors, and every single tree then has a bespoke carbon credit associated to it, not just an average, but a bespoke depending on the size. They were like, oh, we can do this with these schools, but who's going to do the programming? And they were like looking at me, I say, hey, can the Cardano Foundation program it? And I said, no, I can do something much better. I have 40 developers who just graduated from the engineering school in Buenos Aires, who's on the ground, who's willing to do that. And then the governor from the third largest region, he came to the table and said, yeah, we just evacuated or cleared the big building in the city center, because that's where all the public servants were sitting. This is prime real estate, and we want to build a startup environment there, right? And I said, well, that's perfect, because I have somebody with the money, the development bank, who has a real problem about accountability. I have some young people who's looking for jobs, right? It's, you know, it's hard when you get out of university to get a job, specifically if you're in, let's say, maybe not that thriving economic settings, right? And then you need a place to work from as well, right? Because, you know, it might be natural for you and me after COVID to sit in home office, right? But there's certainly a lot of people who just don't have that opportunity because they are basically sharing a flat 10 people, right? And now there's the governor, they basically say, yeah, you can sit with us, right? We have this beautiful building, right? So this is how we think about this circular thing, because I truly believe if you just give people money, it won't solve anything, right? But if you can build these kind of circular systems with accountability around it, I think you can get really far.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's one of the ways we think about this. And is this hard? Yes, it is. Will it work 100%? Probably not, right? But the experience and this data-driven knowledge we can get out of this is going to change the way we build business models of the future. Because transparency is a double-edged sword. Remember when they came out that the Bitcoin blockchain was using the same amount of electricity as a small nation state, and everybody was, this is bad, right? Now we all use Gemini and ChatGPT, and every time we do that, is worse than throwing your iPhone out into the forest and forget about it in terms of the damage to the environment. And we don't care, because the value we're getting, right? The perceived value we're getting out of Gemini and so on, and we don't even pay for it, right? So somebody else pays down the line for that, right? It's not obvious to us, right? But when we got that data with Bitcoin, we didn't really understand Bitcoin, and then suddenly we hear it's the same as polluting as a whole nation state. We were all very worried. And none of the data points we are creating here is going to be very worrisome, all right? Because this will be the first time that you have qualified data, right? Which you can take and have a look at. So this is scary, right? So I actually had a discussion with MI6, which you probably know better than I do, right? So I was together with MI6 and some CEOs from some very large banks, and we were speaking about terrorist financing over blockchains. They were able to come with some statistics and saying, you know, blockchains is being used for proxy armies out of Iran and other things. And I was like, wow, you know, well done. I said, so does that mean that you're going to build up an army of people going to enforce on that? And they're like, yeah, certainly, right? And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. How much of that terrorist financing, or how much is the total sum of terrorist financing in your sort of, in how much do you assert it is, right? What's your assumption? And let's say it's 100. And I said, how much is then the blockchain part? And they said, well, 2 to 5. I said, what about the 95%? Well, we can't see it. It's washed through banks and subsidiaries and shadow banking. And it's just too complicated. And I think we're going to have some moments with blockchain here, as I just illustrated with Bitcoin and power consumption, but also with these world development banks and so forth, where we're suddenly going to get some qualified data, which we will have to take a view on before we could just say, oh, we don't really know, and it's probably not important, right? But now we have the data, and when we have the data, we can start using it.
So Frederik, we are, just for the audience, 24th of February 2025, and the Communist Party's leader, Vitalik of Ethereum fame, I'm joking, is being asked tricky questions around whether he should roll back a massive hack that has just happened to the note of, say, 1.5 billion. You know, without going into any technicalities, that's not the interesting question here. The interesting question is, do they do that? And then, you know, the market discovers and feels that they aren't quite as decentralized as the thesis suggests. or do they not because they're a technical platform? And to this point, terrorism and bad things and good things will always happen on technical platforms, and it's not the technical platform's responsibility. As a man in a similar type of position of influence, tricky question, what would you, if you would, recommend they do?
So Ethereum has already done this, right? So they basically had a hack, right? And where things were locked in a smart contract and they did a rollback. That's why we have Ethereum Classic and we have Ethereum, right? So Ethereum Classic is actually the original Ethereum, right? And Ethereum as we know it today is the new. And we have even a newer version because Ethereum actually discovered that proof of work was not the right way to scale. So they went to Cardano's proof of stake model, right? It's not exactly the same implementation, but they saw that the architecture of Cardano was more scalable, right? And now they're even talking about maybe potentially going from, what's called the account-based model to UTXO or extended UTXO, which Cardano uses, which is a different story. But what I would say to this is that first and foremost, the decentralization and governance is hard. It's very, very hard. And the road Cardano has chosen, which is different than Ethereum, and this is not good or bad, it's just facts, right? Is that we've chosen to be as decentralized as possible with community governance. So we do not have one person or a set of people who will be able to take and implement that decision like Ethereum has, right? So we would actually need a community vote, which will be recorded using digital identity on the blockchain through a voting process and will be ratified by what we think about as the Constitutional Committee, which is looking at a constitution which has been written by the community and verified by the community with a vote online to see if this is at all constitutional.
You kind of alluded to that up front. Like, I'd love the audience and myself to just understand it a bit more. I'm sure some do. But how does that, so explain, plot that out in real time. Like right now you think, okay, got to do something about this. And then talk us through the specific, and I'd like to know numbers, how many people would be involved? What would the weighting be? And then we can think of the pros and cons.
Yeah. So and there is pros and cons. Let's be quite honest about it. I think this is the first time, at least to my knowledge, that if you think about it, like Cardano is probably like 7-8 million citizens, right? But this is actually quite a significant, it's getting close to the size of Switzerland where I'm sitting right now in terms of inhabitants, right? And if you think about in the last, let's say 50 years or 40 years, right? Who has actually written a constitution? Let alone written a constitution for a technology system as a blockchain.
I know, just to jump in, whenever you say anything, I'm just going to call out so that I understand it. Citizens, you would become a citizen if you were to buy a share in the organization, in effect, and in this instance, that would be a token, correct?
Well, you can't really buy a share in it because it doesn't give you ownership rights. It gives you citizen rights. Right, so you don't, as a citizen, you don't really own your country, right? Or you don't own a part of your country. That would mean that you have to buy real estate, right? So if you buy one token, let's say one ADA, right? And ADA is, by the way, coming from Ada Lovelace, which happens to be the first computer engineer, which happened to be female. Very interesting point, right? For all the people who says, why is computer engineers always male, right? But the first was a female. So if you buy one ADA, it basically gives you citizen rights, right? And the way you manage that ADA, due to technicalities, is you manage that through a wallet. Now, that wallet has a history, right? That means that you can interact with that history. You get microfinancing, you can buy art, you can sell things, you can buy computing power, you can hustle together in a small group to do social impact, or you can try and optimize through DeFi. But all of that is recorded on the blockchain. So all your history with this wallet is recorded and becomes a part of an economic history associated to that wallet, which becomes a part of your identity for as long as you maintain it, right? Because you can actually prove that you are the owner, or at least the controller of this wallet, right? Ownership is a hard thing in this very complicated world we live in.
So I have an ADA.
Yeah.
There's one person, and then there's another person or organization who has a lot of them.
Yeah.
And we have those in a wallet. And how do I experience this decision that the citizens are going to make, and how much is my weight by having one or a million going to affect that? Just as I would imagine logically, it's going to be weighted toward your holding.
It's correct for now.
Yep.
For now.
Yep.
So the
Okay.
first thing we had to do is anything which is humanly built, right? I think we can talk about AI in a second, but anything which is humanly built is coming out of some kind of centralization, right? So it's one person or multiple people come together and says, we're going to agree to spend resources to do X, Y, or Z, right? And Cardano started out the same way, right? So it started out by a set of people who came together and said, based on the learnings from Bitcoin and Ethereum, we can do better. Now, I think it's a bit unfair to say we can do better, because what really they said was we can do things a little bit differently to solve some other problems. Where Bitcoin is an amazing store of value, Ethereum really proves that you can do Wall Street without Wall Street, right? Cardano really shows that you can do nearly everything possible on a blockchain using different types of assets. So it can be anything from, you know, intellectual property right to physical assets, like we spoke about before with the trees, or with the, I don't know if I mentioned the satellites with NASA, which we also do, and so on, right? But it can be anything there, and different types of identity.
Yep.
And what then happened is that many years went, and we had to get the blockchain right, and we've never been down, as I told you, since 2017, where we were inaugurated, right? Where we now are is that we came together as a community and we wrote a constitution, because not everything can be in code. Now, maybe in the future we can get better in defining in code, but because we are irrational beings, we needed an off-chain component, but we wanted, the purpose was to have as much on-chain as possible. That means that nearly like a big chunk of what was possible, we put into smart contracts on the chain. But there is a physical document which a regulator or person can read, which basically is the rules of engagement, if you can be so blunt, about Cardano. So what do we want to protect? What do we stand for? To here and no longer. And certain decisions requires a larger amount of vote. So that's also where the voting thresholds are formulated. Plus the way you can change the incentive mechanisms of Cardano is formulated, including how much vote that takes. Then 3 types of organizations was created. The first one is called a delegated representative. So think about if a politician would be on chain and had liquid democracy throwing down their throat all the time. This is the first time we actually see liquid democracy at hand.
Yeah.
So these delegated representatives, they basically say, I have this view, and then you can say, okay, I like that view, and you can delegate your ADA to that person, and he has more decision power. Now, if the person then says, I said this, but I'm going to do something else, you can now, in real time, take away the decision power from him. That means that you have social positive enforcement or punishment, depending on how you look at it, right?
Yep.
Because not everybody has the luxury of working full-time around very complex situations, or maybe you're a subject matter expert in infrastructure, or maybe you're one in governance, or maybe you can have different specialities, right? So you say, I'm a delegate representing a certain specialty. The other institution we have is called a constitutional committee member. So this is currently 7, and it can be more, but it's always an unequal number. It's defined by the constitution. And basically, this is the people who says, is this constitutional conform? This is the closest you will get to sort of a Supreme Court, right? So they're basically looking at the laws and the rules and saying.
And there's 7. There's 7 at the moment.
Well, organizations, huh?
Oh, 7 organizations.
We are one, right? And I have 110 people working here, right? And we have a quite complex governance relationship of how to manage one of those roles.
Yeah.
Right. And every one of them currently is actually organizations, because they saw that this was kind of complex and you needed more people. But it could be one person, but in the moment it's organizations who does it. And you can then displace them. So compared to many other situations where you have to wait 4 years and so on, there's a cyclus here, right? But you can at any given time, basically like in Switzerland, you can basically call for a new constitutional committee to be formed. Huh? So you can basically call a vote of distrust, right? So their job is basically not to say if things are right or wrong, it's just, are they within the law or the constitution? Yep. And the last is what we think about as the stake pool operators or the miners. This is the people who actually run the code, who protect the operation resilience of Cardano. And they basically obviously are looking at, will this break Cardano? Will it break the technology? So you can think about this as a tri-party government. And coming back to your example, which was a great example, right? So we have this big hack, right? Is there one person or a set of persons who can do a change here? The answer is no.
No.
So if there is a technical problem, and a hack is not a technical problem, but if there's a technical problem, let's say something happens in the infrastructure and then Cardano goes down, we have a whole range of rollback functionalities and other things, which is extremely hard because we are the largest distributed computing network in the world. Huh? Think about that for a second. Cardano, the blockchain, is the largest distributed computing network in the world. This is really crazy. And there's over 3,000 stateful operators who take care of the daily operations, and most of them are anonymous. So we don't even have a phone number we can call and say, help us, you need to reboot your node. Right? Therefore, incentives in Cardano is so important, but also the notion of what do we do if Cardano goes down. And here we've been actually approached by regulators who said, we actually think, we asked earlier, is there a difference between 2 years ago and now? But they say, we actually think the future will be more blockchain and more permissionless distributed blockchains than private permission blockchains.
Yeah.
So how are you going to do if we're going to build a CBDC on this? Or what are you going to do if we're going to have the national telco system running on Cardano and something goes wrong? Because this is critical infrastructure. And we are actually approved as a critical infrastructure provider in the USA of America because we work with NASA. And NASA went through to get a critical approval because sending rockets up into space is critical infrastructure. So we are working with regulators around the world to get this right. Right? Meaning part education, but also how do we do the monitoring and how do we do what's called SOC 2, which basically is how you risk mitigate in the current world on these networks. Now, the other part is what would actually happen. So what would happen is that somebody in the community will say, oh, this is wrong or this is not wrong, and they will have to do a governance proposal. And they will have choice now. Huh? And I only got this question now, you put me in the hot seat, right? But the first thing they can do is, should we take 1.5 billion, I think you said, out of the decentralized treasury of Cardano and give back to the people who lost it? That would be maybe the first thing, because Cardano actually has a decentralized treasury managed by the community worth 1.5 billion. So that's an option, right? And then the first thing will happen is that they will have to upload this proposal to the blockchain so it's visible to all. Yep. It's now in black and white or in code. Right? Which means that you as an ADA holder will now have the power to vote on it. And you're right, for now, one ADA, one vote. So the more ADA you have, the more you control. However, we don't have anybody currently, neither an association or a set of organizations or one individual who will be able to take over a decision like that. It's just too decentralized, also from a ADA ownership perspective. Now, you're probably going to see some ETFs, some other things emerging in the future, like we see with BlackRock buying up Bitcoin and microfinance, MicroStrategy, and so on. So let's see how the world evolves. But right now, Cardano is quite protected due to the way it's working, right?
Yeah, and I did. I saw the. I mean, there's been rumors and speculation for a long time, but you get the sense that's coming for you guys pretty soon. Are you excited or not about that specifically?
Both. So both. Why is it both? Right. Well, for a long time we've been living sort of in a split world, right? So in many countries we were completely okay, right? So in Switzerland, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., right? Japan, we are an infrastructure, blockchain, fully okay to deploy everything on Cardano, all good. But in one very large country, there's been sort of this hurdle: are you A or B? And you can also be all of above at the same time, right? So I think from a US perspective, the more clarity we have about what is what, the better it is for the whole market. And I think one way of creating this clarity is not just saying it, but it's also doing these rulings. And due to the nature of an ETF in the US, this is a very clear, line in the sand, right? Yeah. So that makes me quite excited, right? The other side is I do feel blockchain is much more than a financial asset, specifically Cardano. And that's also one of the reasons we're actually working on putting programmability into Bitcoin, because we think that Bitcoin is a real asset. It's a real asset class, right? But it doesn't have programmability in the same way Cardano has. So what if you could use security and programmability of Cardano to do escrow accounts and fractionalization and DeFi, but also TradFi, but using Bitcoin as an asset class without having an intermediary in a trusted execution environment? That would be amazing, right? Because what you then basically show is that ADA gives you gas, right? So basically you pay for the programmability, but you don't dilute Bitcoin, right? And so I think options like that, like we're working with Bitcoin Oasis Call and others to do that, is an amazing way forward. Also to show that Cardano is much more than a financial asset. It's an infrastructure component where you can do everything from Doctors Beyond Borders to United Nations Humanitarian Crisis Organization to, forestry in the Amazonas to oil tracking with Petrobras, which we do down in Brazil, by the way, right? So and so forth. And the more you can show these kind of use cases, the more the policymakers and regulators say, okay, you are not in that box, you are in these boxes, right? So it's also consumer protection and the infrastructure. No, it gets wider. The discussion enhances. So I'm equally excited, but also a little bit. I don't want to be only crypto. Crypto is amazing. Crypto can solve a lot of things. We started out there, right? But I think the ability for blockchain goes, like Cardano and like Polkadot and Avalanche and a few others, goes way beyond crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it's like one of the privileges that I have is, getting to talk to leaders in the positions that you are, and one can make assumptions from research and talking around, but I think the really valuable part of trying to find out, where is this space going to go and what's the direction, is there going to be a zero-sum game here where one just ends up being the application layer for everything, or is there a universe where 100 have different focuses? It's certainly trying to understand the philosophy of the leaders. So I get a very strong sense from you around your principles and where you want this to go, in a really encouraging, fantastic way, Frederik, which actually maybe wouldn't have been the assumptions I would have if I'd just thought about what I'd absorbed around Cardano, to be honest and transparent with you. And I think that's part of your role is, getting out there, being a spokesman, educating, and others, of course, doing that around why you think this is valuable and being very honest around, it doesn't mean that there's not cons and pros that are coming together as we make the progress. So, I always think to myself, look, in 10, 20, 30 years time, have I screwed up the platform that I've got if I haven't asked the right questions? You're talking about being, the largest decentralized, how did you phrase it? Computer system. Is that right? The largest decentralized.
I use the word distributed compute system in the world.
Distributed computer system in the world.
Yeah.
So that's just wild, right? Like you've got this huge opportunity, as do several others. And, what's going to come down to in 10, 20 years, 30 years time, the value being achieved, I think will be a few strategic decisions, and it'll probably come down to like some moral compass over the long term and philosophy. And so I want to understand you, Frederik, the leader, and that for me might be one of the important things to dig into here. So if you could really take us back to specifically when you started thinking around your philosophy. I mean, really, this is a big topic. It's not just financial technology innovation here. This is macro politics, macroeconomics coming together, the philosophy of work, many big topics. When you really started to think about like who you were going to be and why you wanted to take something as big as this on, and why, so we can understand, the kind of seminal story around, not necessarily when you're in just transactional banking, when you thought, okay, I want to make a change. If you did, you could take us there, please.
Yeah, I think a part of me has always wanted to do something which was larger than the impact I can do personally. All right. So I've always been trying to put high performance teams together who could do a larger output than the sum of the people together. Right. And getting these exponential teams together is truly hard, right? And there are so many different target operating models out there, but a lot of them are extremely short-term thinking. So that's one part. The other part is I was sort of looking at doing a career change, and my daughter was very small at the time. Asked me, why are you up in the middle of the night? I mean, I was saying, I'm rebuilding a bank, and she was like, why? I said, well, it's they have to be profitable and they have to serve their clients better. And she was saying, why? And I was like, that's actually a really good question. What is the bank really doing for society, like at large? Are they really working for their clients today? Are they really creating opportunities in the local ecosystem, and some do, right? Not all, right? But some do, right? And one of my clients I was working with, which was not a non-bank, was the Cardano ecosystem. I was helping them to do a few things, and they had this non-for-profit foundation in Switzerland, and I was giving that a second thought, because I was like, okay, if Cardano really works and it upgrades the systems of the world and it brings more people to be able to be interoperable and give economic opportunities around the world, that is a lot larger than I would ever be able to do with a small team. But how do I take something which is not very well funded? Back then, the ADA price was quite different, right? And there was a lot of uncertainty, both regulatory-wise, but there was also no blockchain really, right?
Roughly what year was this?
This is about 5 years ago now.
Yeah. Okay.
How do I actually build a high-performance team if I cannot give the best salaries in the world, and I cannot, promise big bonuses, but I can just, give them the chance to change the world?
Why were you so, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's not like everyone does it. Why were you so hell-bent on the high performance team? Where's that experience? And again, it sounds obvious, but it sounds like you took it to the level of this needs to be world class. So why were you hell-bent on that?
Because there was no blockchain 5 years ago who had proven outside maybe potentially Bitcoin, and we can discuss that for a very long time, that this would even work, right? Because the promise of Bitcoin was a lot larger than what we've seen today, right? So it was basically when you're trading, you always say, don't go against the stream, right? Don't walk up the waterfall, right? Just, have to follow the market, because you're always the smallest, right? Regardless who you are, you cannot, a fully functioning market, you cannot steer that, right? Today, there are some entities who might potentially can do that, right? But that was one of the philosophies in banking. And when I was looking at Cardano and blockchain in general, I was like, you know what, this has a real chance of working, but it does not work today. The technology is not there. The systems around the world is not able to interact or to collaborate or to hook up to this, right? The fear of change is too big, right? People are really scared of changing, right? And specifically for the Western world, the problem is not big enough. Banking does really work. If it's T+2 or T+1 or T+0, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, in the end, it's not like a burning city, right? Where you can walk in with a hose and then, you can start rebuilding it afterwards. That's not, unfortunately, where banking is or was 5 years ago, right? So I said, okay, if this has to work, we need to have a high performance team together. It cannot be too big. So it has to be at a certain size.
Yep.
We have to have some very strong leadership principles in place. And one of those leader principles is, you get the fame, I take the blame. Because even though I do say that lean and design thinking doesn't work on blockchain, it is certainly true that if you're trying to do something which nobody's done before, you need experts, and you need to give them the power to take decisions within their remits of expertise. And to do that, you need a very solid strategy, and you need guardrails, right? So if there's one person who has to take all decisions, you get the output of what one brain can think. And I'm certainly not an Einstein, right? So I knew that I would have to rely on subject matter experts in fields I had never any experience with, right? Because there's no way I would be upgrading myself to be the expert in cryptographic science or quantum security and so on, right? So I would need to have a trust organization where I can push the power down to the people who actually know what they're doing. And my job would be about safeguarding the strategy, the rails, but also give them the certainty and the vision that if we do this right, we have more than 50% likelihood that we will change the world. Because I cannot give them the high salaries, I cannot give them, what a normal company does in terms of bonuses and so on. But what I can give them is I can upgrade them, give them exposure. I can put them into a high performance team where they can do things who will last for generations to come, and who will change the way we look at human labor, but also how we look at the economy at large. But you can't do that from day one, right? Because smart people will just say, well, prove me that it's there. And you don't have it. So you have to start somewhere, right? And start building on small things until you can get up to a place where you actually have an organization.
So understanding some of the kind of portfolio of considerations one would have, who is one of these individuals, highly talented, you touched a few there. One would be, change the world. Okay, I want to have impact, purpose. Another would be, typically these type of individuals also like to absorb and be around other high performers. I say typically, almost always, if they want to work in a team. And then you said you can pay them very much. So then the compensation typically would be a huge carrot from wealth creation, hence in a normal venture capital background, equity, and then in where it's relatively obvious, it'll either fail or there'll be an event, or in this type of space, some type of holding that obviously can be generational wealth. Is that something that you managed to have to be able to get this talented team together?
Oh, unfortunately not, because I didn't have those opportunities, right? So in 2017, we got a gift of an amount of Bitcoin and ADA, and we don't have any other income streams, right? So we got a one-off. So it's not like if the blockchain does well, the Cardano Foundation gets some part of the transaction fee or something like that. We're completely decoupled, right? We don't even participate at the current stage, right? In this decentralized treasury the Cardano blockchain has, right? We could potentially do that in the future, but we have not participated up until this day, right? So we got this grant in 2017, right? And that you can check the prices. All of my economics, by the way, on the blockchain, right? It was also kind of interesting. I posted my balance sheet and my earnings statement on the blockchain. And here in a month's time, I will also post a set of APIs that you can go digging. Right now, you can already see how much rent I pay for the offices and so on.
Just roughly then, if we can all do that, what type of treasury are you sat on then, Frederik?
So we have, plus minus, I don't know when this podcast goes out, right? But we have 1 million ADA. We have 900 Bitcoins, and we have about just north of 30 million in cash aside. And when I arrived here, the prices was completely different. I mean, you can go in and have a look, but I remember I was looking at it, I was saying, okay, you have 10 million, plus minus, you have $10 million to save the world and build a high performance team. And if you go into an investment bank, it's quite normal that a trader gets $1 million pop a year, right? And if you want to have one of the best computer engineers, who, by the way, is be able to kind of find bugs and errors in a distributed system, right? You have to pay quite a lot as well, right? So I was sort of looking at that and thinking, we have to start small. We have to get somewhere, right? But so what we've done is we designed an organizational system which designed in a weird way is very encapsulated, right? So we are actually supervised by the Foundation Supervisory Authority in Switzerland, based on the original founder's vision or intent. And we actually have personal liability, which is not that fun always in blockchain, but we have full personal liability, me and the board. So it's really about behaving well compared to that, because it's not just, criminal law is criminal law. This is, if you divert from the original intent, they go fully after you and they can take everything, right? Including your freedom. Huh? And so I decided that we need to, the strategy is the most important part, right? So how do we get to a situation that Cardano becomes economically self-sustainable, but also how do we get to a situation that Cardano does not get weaponized? Any new technology, think AI, think quantum computing, think internet, think blockchain, right? The first set of applications is very frequently, about defense or attack, or it's about information asymmetry. So very few people design something where they become extremely rich or get a very large benefit because the rest of the world is trying to catch up, right? So what was really important for me was to try and is find out what can we do with the level of technology back then who could prove that Cardano can do more than just be a promise. So can we do something who actually moves the needle? And one of the first things we did was this proof of stake was one of the few features we had back then, was we wanted to actually test using data how many people in Cardano is just here due to a short-term wealth optimization opportunity compared to how many do really believe in the vision that Cardano can change the world. So we built a small thing in metadata who allows you to upload to the blockchain a verification that, for instance, you paid X amount to save the children or to, like an NGO, right? So just to verify I do X, but for the outcome, for what I get out of it, I spend it for social good. And in a very fast amount of time, I believe it was 6 to 9 months, we got close to 800 million ADA into that, just by people uploading this receipt to the blockchain, saying if you stake to my stake pool, I'm spending that to the plastic project in Norway or to save the children, whatever it was. And it really blew my mind because I'm coming out of banking, right? And banking is all about money. If I can get a cent tomorrow, I'll do it, right? And here you had this apparently huge ecosystem who had this strong vision that we have an opportunity of changing the world and status quo is not acceptable. And now I could measure that people actually were willing to give away a short, like an economic opportunity, but they want the proof. They need the proof because they don't trust you that you're going to do what you say you do.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful because that's really what blockchain is about.
Yeah.
And that's also why, as I said, my earnings statement and P&L statement is on the blockchain, right? And we are encouraging other companies to do that. And we're actually building tools to allow you to run your business from a finance perspective on the blockchain, right? Because I think in the future, if you think about Credit Suisse, super famous bank, right? Who just unfortunately was bought by UBS, right? Because they had a trust problem, right? They were not out of money, but there was no way they could show the investors and the clients that they were not in problem because nobody trusted them. Could you imagine you could press a magic button and you could see that Credit Suisse had sufficient capital without doubt? It would not have gone down. But could you equally imagine that normally when you go to a general assembly, this is all sort of coordinated, right? So the big pension fund or investor, they have already coordinated with the board, what is the topics, who's going to be the new chairperson, etc., right? But if you could go exploring in the financial statements and the P&L statements of companies, you only own one share, right? You would go up to that general assembly because you use a large language model or some machine learning or whatever, and you found out that suddenly there's an exposure or they're doing something you don't understand. And you say, hey, Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman, I only have one question. That transaction there, what's that? Now, by giving this brain power, or actually using the brain power of the billions of people around the world, assisted by machine learning and compute power on qualified data, not internet data, but qualified data, right? I think we're going to get to a situation where we see a new breed of companies emerging. Not companies who say we're going to do ESG because it's better for our balance sheet. No, companies who say, actually, we want to do things differently because we realize we have a community responsibility to the people we employ in the community. Or we have we have a responsibility to the way we do mining. And if you can prove without doubt that the Tesla car you're driving has actually all the rare metals is sustainable mined by people who's above 16 years old, right? And you can verify that on a blockchain, I think you can put an extra premium on that Tesla car and you'll be able to sell it.
Yeah, I think the genius and sensibilities that get taken away from children, and the question that your daughter asked you, it's just such a good example of a child thinking, well, why? Like, why would you do this? And then as an adult, you have all these constructs from the system and the incentives where you have a responsibility, so you don't question things. I don't think generalizing that human nature wants to do bad things and go to an investment bank and just churn money around. It does feel like one of the things that fintech and then blockchain hopefully will, and we won't get it perfect, right? But we'll make progress towards is redefining some of those incentives, as you say. And if it's economically incentivized, then we have such a wonderful opportunity over the next 20, 30 years to create organizations with more purpose, so that I think we're both in a fortunate position in some sense. I mean, in another, you're obviously in a much larger pressurized platform, but me in my own small way, I've taken it upon myself to answer that question. I have a daughter, she's 6. Why are you doing this? I do want to be able to say, oh, because it's good. It's better if obviously the world works in this way and people's careers are spent full of purpose and they get value from that, and we're solving the right type of things. I completely feel that there is a few categories, and it's always when there's new technology. People in the garage, they're just here because technically they wanted to be on the cutting edge of building technology. That is what that is. And then you have crime because there's an opportunity, because the rails have changed. And then you have up here, what actually this thing will end up being defined as successful or not, which is, do you have, the world and communities and people coming to it and it being a better place for it or not? And we've got these debates because of social media. We've got these debates because of artificial intelligence. We've got these debates because of cryptocurrency and blockchain. My good sense studying history is that overall, good and bad will happen, but overall we'll make progress because of it. And it's going to take enough good people trying to push that positive progress for it to happen. So it sounds to me like one of the opportunities that you're on is having this huge community of citizens, and you have done some filtering and segmentation through genuine methods to hope that as many of them as possible are here for positive progress, which must be such a thrill. You talk to your daughter now, I'm sure the answer's different. Why did you work this weekend, or why were you working this evening, or why do you got pressure at the moment, Daddy? And I'm sure that there's an immediate response, which is, I'm working hard, but there's a pretty big opportunity here for me to do something massively positive whilst all that's happening, Frederik. And please talk to that if you'd like to. I'd like to do the Marn around because it will give us some of the ways that you're working through this. I'm sure when you're interviewed a lot of the time, it's on some of these topics that we've discussed. Love to kind of know how you're handling this whilst this is all going on personally. So just to start with, if you could put anything on the front cover of your favorite publication, what would the message be?
Think bigger and have hope.
Love it. What is a particular ritual that is dear to you that you come back to? It could be a paragraph, could be a particular part of a book, or it could be, a mantra or a ritual.
Every year I go out into the mountains and I do a multi-day either running or skiing event, because when you move in the mountains alone over several days, at a certain stage there is no reality anymore. It's just about the next step. It's about nature. It's about food. It's about connecting with whatever kind of social people around you, and it resets your mind and ensures that you focus on the things that's truly important for you.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow, I love that. In the morning, do you have a particular habit, system, anything that's, to set you up to be as productive as possible?
I'm actually trying at the moment to do some morning yoga. It's not very long. It's just sort of 20-30 minutes, but I try to 45 days a week to get up at the morning and then do 20 to 30 minutes yoga before I wake up the kids.
Are you doing that in the sauna, or just?
I am building my sauna hopefully this spring. I don't have a
Ooh.
sauna today, but my hope is that me and the kids will build a sauna. So they're quite small. They're 7 and 9, but they're already getting. They like to do physical stuff because you can feel it and see it. And I like to expose them to tools and show them you can build real big things as well. So my spring project is to build a sauna with the kids.
Oh my God, amazing. I love that. And at the moment, and I'm not talking about coffee, what is keeping you up at night?
I find it extremely hard to get accurate information. So what's keeping me up at night is this constant worry is, do I really have the real facts? And I feel that there's really no longer a platform I trust to give me those facts outside maybe some blockchain metrics. But for the blockchain metric, you really need to understand the incentives, because even those can be skewed, right? But before you could go to university and you can learn everything about a certain type of trade, or you could read the newspaper, or you could go to Wikipedia. But I really feel that like global decision making today, understanding the true nature of where things are, is so hard. So I spend more time on long form podcasts, so like 2-3 hour podcasts where people really discuss, because it gets easier after an hour or something to figure out if it's true or not true. You get a certain sense, right? And I also spend more time on slow media, like monthly magazines or those kind of reviews who comes out. And specifically, if I can get them in different languages than English, I prefer that. I find the English is getting very tainted as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely relate to that. It's quite gooey out there, isn't it, to get a grip of anything that's not riddled in the propaganda. So yeah, you do get that sense on more long form interviews or articles. There's the truth within it. So yeah, completely relate. In the show, we always like to cheekily ask who else you might put forward as an excellent person to come on for the audience. So opportunity for you to promote anyone that you think is an interesting spokesman to come on the Searching for Mana show next.
Yeah, what popped on top of my mind is is probably quite different than you expect. There's a guy called John Perkins. He's quite up in his age, and he used to be an economist, and he wrote a book called Economic Hitman, kind of something like that. He has a quite different view of the world because he's been in some of these very private and closed cycles about decision making with some of these world leading institutions. So I think from the style of your show, I think he would be a very interesting character to get on board. Yeah. The other one, which I'm always sort of amazed by, and I don't have a lot of contact in any way, is basically Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh yeah. I've had a response. I've had a response from his team.
Okay. Yeah.
But he's been busy.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah. From his historical context with his father and how he grew up in Austria, to his views of the US today, and his work ethics, and how he, with a limited set of skills, sorry for being so blunt, right, but with a limited set of skills, can have had such a big impact on the world in multiple industries. I think that would be quite unique. So there's at least two persons which you normally won't get recommended, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. And certainly with John, if we did, then I think you should co-host that with me, because I love, very long form conversations around, and particularly with you, the different constructs we could have in the economy right now, and just on this show. And the thing with Searching for Mana is, we have guests back some of the time. I think there's another show there for us. This one was to set the scene a little bit about you. Obviously the platform you're on, obviously your time is very valuable, but perhaps we would love to do that one together. Yeah.
I would love to do that. I think we could also get some quite interesting perspectives with your fund, with John and his sort of experience, and then with what can blockchain actually do, because he's as far away as blockchain as you can probably get, but he's as deep as it gets in terms of the global decision making and the impact of what his life has had in certain countries, also in terms of taking down nation state leaders. And we have built new nation state leaders who does not have a nation, right? They're sitting in a blockchain, which is so amazing, right?
Crazy, yeah.
New economic opportunities, and making the world of academic able to measure it if it works. Everybody was thinking liquid democracy is better, but they didn't have any data points. Now we will have, right? Everybody was saying, what if you take down the appointment period of a certain judge? What would that do to incentive systems, right? Now we can measure it, right, through digital identities on the Cardano blockchain, not in a small vacuum like a university, right, but for millions of people, right?
Yeah.
So to be able to test some of these things out, which could or could not work, right? And I think that's exciting. Hopefully, that
exactly. And on the core show, I don't want to ever veer it towards the fund you refer to that we've talked about, but for a particular agenda, we could certainly share some examples and experiences. So the big question, Frederik, just to reset it for anybody who doesn't know, you're on the Searching for Mana show. Mana is really a way of describing superpower. So would love to know what you'd say your mana is.
I would default always say you have to ask somebody who knows me, and they will tell you. But ask like that, I have to come with an answer. It's probably I'm a hopeful optimist who truly believe in the human nature and the ability to do greatness if we can get these incentive models to play together with the tooling we have at hand.
Yeah. That's amazing. I completely agree. That incentive part is so crucial there. I think a lot of human nature can be swayed just due to circumstances, and incentives can control them. So yeah, I love that, and certainly think that that is a great superpower to have on your mana card. I have taken a lot of your valuable time, and as mentioned, I hope we do another show, but I think we've given the audience a good perspective and sweeping view of what is such a ocean of opportunity that you put on top of. Frederik, getting to know you certainly given me confidence that, you know, you're somebody who's got a wonderful moral compass, and certainly comes across that you're a hopeful optimist. I love that. Just to give you the platform, just to conclude, however far out you want to set the time horizon, several years, 30 years, if you could just really riff on, you know, why to talk to your daughter now, 5 years on, you know, why are you doing this?
In 30 years from now, huh? I think I would lean so much out of the window and say, if humans is the product, then we are no longer humans. So if we are going to coexist in a world with general AI and other emerging technologies, I think the coexistence between humans and blockchain is what's going to allow us to coexist as humans in a world driven by technology.
Very powerful. Yeah, I love it. And I think that it's not assured. So it's going to take the going to take the right people, making sure that it ends up that way around. Frederik, thank you so much for coming on Searching for Mana show. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. And I would love to join another one, either alone or with John Perkins. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Searching for Mana podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it and hope to see you again next time. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes to make sure you receive all the latest episodes as they are released.